Today's parsha is Lekh Lekha. And before I get into the specific text for this week, I want to lay some background onto what I'm going to be talking about. As many of you may already know, I am leading a Chavara in Your Belinda on the study of the book of Job. And we are looking at the first chapter, which deals with the introduction of Job and pretty much the setting of it. And our last session got a little bit intense, quite passionate, because we're looking at the nature of Hasatan. In verse 6 of chapter 1 of Job, he's introduced in kind of the cosmic interaction between God and Hasatan. And so it was quite interesting. Very good, though. Very healthy, very edifying. And we were looking at the nature of Hasatan in order to know our enemy. And we looked at the portions within Job, but also a few portions outside of Job. Who is this character? Who is this entity? And one of the portions we looked at was from the Gospel of John, chapter 8, which reads, "Why do you not understand what I am saying? It is because you cannot hear my word. You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature. For he is a liar and the father of lies." And as I said in our study of this, we were looking at a lot of different aspects of who he is. But this portion emphasizes that he is, underlined there, the father of lies. Now, in the specific book of Job, he's dealing with his one personal suffering and the interaction of his dilemma as an individual. But because the enemy, Hasatan, is the father of lies, he not only lies to an individual, he lies to married couples. He lies to congregations, sowing the seeds of dissent and confusion. He lies to governments and nations and politicians. And so because the nature of who he is that he lies to everybody, that's part of what we were looking at and discussing. And so with that background, I want to kind of now jump into today's specific text. Today's parsha is taken from Genesis chapters 12 through 17. And I want to begin in chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." Now, that's a pretty famous portion of Scripture many of you may be familiar with. And I want to jump down to chapter 15, kind of continuing this blessing in verse 18. "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, 'To your offspring I assign this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates.'" Now, I've underlined, bolded, made enlarged that portion there because it's important, kind of what I'm emphasizing for this portion. This is technically what the borders of Israel should look like according to that scripture. On the western side is the Nile River, the river of Egypt, and on the northern eastern side is the river Euphrates. Now, this gentleman, I got this picture from, many of you may know, Oliver Melnick. He's been here before. He's talked about this. He's very well versed in anti-Semitism. He's given presentations here before about the land of Israel and prophecy. Very well knowledgeable. And he's written a number of books. He sent me this picture, but it's also available online. And some of the text there you can't really make out, but you can kind of get an idea of the surrounding areas. Now, one thing I want to mention here, I'm going to come back to this map in this portion here, but I do want to make a distinction. There is a lot of anti-Semitism of Israel, but rather than just criticizing Israel and being anti-Semitic about it, we can be critical of Israel. Israel is not a perfect nation. There is no perfect nation. The United States is not a perfect nation. It doesn't exist. We can be critical of some of Israel's faults without being anti-Semitic and having a blanket sentiment of delegitimizing its existence. Some of the criticisms that we may have, there's a article here from Haaretz, you may see it there, the title, "Shh, don't tell evangelical supporters of Israel But abortion there is legal, and often it's free, taken from May of this year. Another article from Arut Sheva, number of abortions among IDF soldiers rises, taken from August of this year. The army itself having abortions. Also, Consulate General of Israel from Los Angeles, portion here in large. Tel Aviv is considered the gay capital of the Middle East, thanks to its thriving and supported LGBT community playing an integral role in Israeli society. Tourist Israel, Tel Aviv Gay Pride Parade, June 12, 2020, coming up. Again, another portion there, self-proclaimed the gay capital of the Middle East, and perhaps one of the gay capitals of the world. So there are some areas that we can criticize and be observant of what Israel does and some of the things that they support, social policies that they have. But that doesn't mean we delegitimize their existence. That doesn't mean they don't have a right to exist. We need to be fair in our criticisms of Israel while still supporting it. This is contrasted to what I started this portion off with from the Gospel of John, the father of lies. Some of you may be familiar with this, the Jewish peril, protocols of the learned elders of Zion. This is from the pits of hell. This was a manuscript that was taken from a number of different resources in the early 20th century, basically claiming a worldwide Jewish conspiracy, a globalization that they would take over the world. It's been well known to be a fraud and a hoax, but in the early 20th century in Europe, it was perpetuated as truth and as propaganda. And it sowed the seeds of a lot of anti-Semitism, whether it was the Nazi Holocaust that Rob had mentioned, or even the Arab League perpetuating some of the propaganda. This definition here, apartheid, a former policy of segregation and political economic discrimination against non-European groups in the Republic of South Africa. In South Africa, I won't get into the whole history of it, but that was a real legitimate apartheid, a minority racial group oppressing a majority racial group. And again, I won't get into that history. But that is being equated to what's going on in Israel right now, which leads to the BDS movement, End Israeli Apartheid, Free Palestine, Boycott, Divest, Sanction. Now, by a show of hands, how many people here have actually been to Israel any time in their lives in history? Okay, quite a number of you. How many of you have actually been there, let's say, within the past 10 years? Okay, still quite a number of you. If you've actually stepped foot in Israel and been there, you will know right off the bat, this is one of the biggest bold-faced lies that's out there. Just by being there, you will see the distinction. Israel is one of the most diverse places in the entire Middle East, if not the entire world. Even in Jerusalem, one of the more reserved religious areas. But Israel is far from being an apartheid. But again, this is sown by the father of lies. Unfortunately, even within our own government, this is just one congresswoman, Ilhan Omar, who perpetuates a number of other lies about Israel. And so my point is that we can be objective and give criticism about some of the wrong that Israel does and some of their faults. But that's different than the bold-faced lies that's perpetuated by the father of lies, the enemy. And so going back to this portion, this is what God has ordained. From chapter 15, he lays down the borders of Israel. And no other authority is more supreme than God to give that land. Israel has a legal property deed granted, assigned by God himself. Taken from today's Parsha and the Genesis chapter 15. Now, I want to just kind of close with the fact that sometimes within nonprofit organizations, churches, synagogues, there's a tendency to kind of shy away from getting politically involved. And the old saying, the separation of church and state, is not that we shouldn't be politically involved. On the contrary, it's that the state doesn't impress its influence on the church. And so if we don't get politically involved, if we don't raise our voices to things, then where is the voice to stand and protect Israel? The idea that, well, we don't want to lose our nonprofit status or our church status. The only real legal restriction to discussing politics is that we don't blatantly campaign for an individual candidate. Anything short of that is pretty much legally permissible. Otherwise, if Doug came up here and said homosexuality is wrong or abortion is wrong, he could be sued, and there are actually attempts to kind of do that now. But right now, as it stands, there is a lot of leeway that we can do politically. That goes with social issues, even economic issues, but specifically, especially foreign policy issues when we stand for Israel. God forbid, as Rob had just mentioned, Kristallnacht, God forbid we repeat history when during World War II, with exception, the vast majority of the church or the body was silent. God forbid we repeat that because we're too afraid, well, we might lose our nonprofit status. We don't want to infringe on any illegal activity because we're a church or a synagogue. We need to be politically involved. We need to stand for what Israel is about and their right to exist. And our political basis is in the scripture itself. This portion is essentially a political legal document. Without this, it's very easy to make an argument that within the past 100 or 200 years, although not very strong in my opinion, but there's a stronger argument that Palestine does have a much greater right. But because God himself is the supreme authority to this, it trumps any other type of argument for their right, for any counter argument for Israel to exist. So please stay involved, please stay encouraged, and find your resources within Scripture to stand for Israel. Shabbat shalom.